Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Banzuke podcast for Tachiai. I'm Bruce Henderson, Associate Editor of Tachiai. Joining me is none other than creator of Tachiai, Andy. Say hello, Andy.
Hey, how are you?
And our man in foreign lands, currently talking to us from Tokyo, it's Josh. Hi, Josh.
Hey, I'm glad to be back on the podcast with you guys, and I brought a cake to celebrate the
Nice.
third anniversary of Goeido's U Show with you guys.
It's a
The
few
third
days,
birthday.
early, but I think it's really that's good stuff. Good old
It's
Goeido.
always a great time to celebrate.
Yeah, especially when it's the fact that Goeido actually was healthy enough to compete with all of his firepower. So we had the Banzuke drop a week ago today. There was a really good prediction by Leonard, who did his fantastic job, and then probably about 20% more on calling this kind of tumultuous Banzuke. But it was still full of plenty of things to consider. So Josh, why don't you get us started? What are some of your thoughts and reactions on the Banzuke?
Sure, quick one first. I just wanted to say I'm super stoked. Hoku Tenkai of Onoibe, some people might know him as Takanoiwa's cousin.
Yep.
He had a very tumultuous start to his sumo career, and now he finally makes his debut on the Banzuke down Jonokuchi this tournament. So he's going to be one to look out for. He's a decent prospect. I would say maybe it'll take some time. I actually saw him doing Keiko at Onoe earlier this year, and that stable has some interesting folks coming through with Ryuko as well, and there's another guy called Hodaka, and now they've got Hoku Tenkai, so that's super exciting. In terms of the thing that came to mind first when I saw this Banzuke was actually not even about this Banzuke. It wasn't even about anybody who's in sumo right now. It reminded me of 20 years ago and the way that having a super strong Heia can really help you with the strength of schedule. And so even though it's not the case now, there's things that are happening down the Banzuke that I thought were really interesting for us to start to watch. And so
Yep.
what I kind of am calling back to is, if you think to around the turn of the century, Musashi Gawa had Musashi Maru's, great Yokozuna.
Yep.
They had 3 Ozeki at that time, and they had another guy called Wakanoyama hanging around the Joijin. And it had a real impact on the type of schedule that you look at. These guys were facing folks down at Maegashira 6 because they couldn't fight each other up there at the top of the Banzuke. So if you were a guy around, the top of the Banzuke, a high rank like Chio Taikai, you had to fight all the Yokozuna and all the other Ozeki, and it had a real impact. In the 90s, Futagoyama, of course, with the Takanohana and Wakanohana, they had as many as 7 guys at the top of the Banzuke. And so, I was thinking about that because since then, Sado Gatake, they've had a couple Ozeki ones from time to time, but the closest we've come to that was actually a couple years ago when Isegahama had, they look like they might be the stable that was set to do that. They had Haruma Fuji as a Yokozuna. You had Terano Fuji flying up the rankings to become Ozeki. And then when he was promoted, you had Takara Fuji and Amanishiki, and they were in the Joijin at that time. So that had a real impact, but, we know how things went with Terano Fuji. Now, I think it's a real credit to Isegahama Oyakata, the former Asahi Fuji, the Yokozuna, because when you see guys come, off the Banzuke, they retire or they fall down out of the salaried ranks, it can take stables a really long time to bring new guys up to Sekitori. And what he's done is, as Amanishki's retired, as Terano Fuji's become injured, all of a sudden, Teratsuyoshi, great tournament last time, he's flying up to Maegashira 9. And right below the paid ranks, you've got Nishiki Fuji and Midori Fuji in there. And if they have a great tournament this time,
Yep.
they'll be primed to make their Sekitori debut in the next tournament. And so who knows how this is going to play out, what he's had to oversee as Oyakata is he's lost guys through scandal, through injury, through aging, and yet he's pretty seamlessly been able to bring that next generation along. So I think it's really commendable. If you look at the stables that have been up there, in the last couple of years, it's been tough. We thought Taganoro, Kisano Sato, and Takayasu up there at the same time, they might have been able to benefit. They could never take advantage of that. There's a couple other stables that are doing well, but I think it's a really great credit to Isegahama, and I'm looking forward to see how Nishiki Fuji, Midori Fuji do, and the continued development of Teratsuyoshi.
Yep. Interesting stuff. Especially when you take into account just how a year ago it looked like Isakahama was on the rocks. All right, Andy, your turn. Reactions to the Banzuke.
Well, I guess one of the biggest reactions that I have is the predicted fading of a lot of our old generation,
Yeah.
like with Ikioi, and so that wasn't, I guess, on the surprise meter. It was just rather unfortunate to start seeing some of our wrestlers, some of our favorite wrestlers, start falling down. But that
Yeah.
means that we've been getting quite a bit of churn and a lot of new guys coming up, like Tomokaze. That'll be very, very interesting. And I mean, to kind of uh, I guess follow up with what Josh was saying, it'd be interesting to see how well Chiganora is able to do, since Takahana Bea kind of um, was absorbed into his Heia, and he's got quite a lot of Sekitori up there, that he was able to absorb, and so it would be interesting to see whether, I guess, all of the drama gets flushed out of that stable after this tournament, because Takakeisho kind of has his own little Banzuke drama. He's going to need to get 10 this tournament in order
Yep.
to go back up to Ozeki, and we'll get to this a little bit later, but I think it's shocking that Goedo is really the stable Ozeki for now. And then as far as
Ouch.
others on the Banzuke, I'd be very interested to see our newbie Tsurugisho, be able to see him in prime time.
Yeah.
And some guys like Onosho, Shohozan, Kagayaki, and Myogiru, I think they're pretty low on the Banzuke, and so I'm looking forward to seeing them really kind of clean up if they're healthy. I think Onosho is the one that I'm a little bit concerned that he's not quite there yet, but Kagayaki and Myogi-ryu should be really pretty well placed for maybe even 10 wins. So
Yep. So just for myself, I think the piece that really rings with me is that after such a long time and taking a lot of heat, Kakuryu seems to really come into his own. It's clear that Yokozuna Hakuho is on a sort of manage the exit path. That's not to say that he's phoning it in, because clearly he's not. But he's not even completely, I'm sorry. He's not really the same kind of strength or power that he had shown in the past. He's still a formidable opponent, but for reasons that are almost sort of, tough to wrap your head around, Kakeru seems to be a serious contender at this point, and it'll be interesting to see how it turns out in, for lack of a better term, the rematch that's going to happen at Aki at the top of the Banzuke, where it looks like, at least from practice, from the Soken, and we're going to get a great download from Josh here in a minute on that, that Hakuho is fairly Genki, but I have to like Kakuryu's chances coming into this tournament, because at long last he seems to actually be dialed into his sumo, and his sumo is particularly dangerous, whereas Hakuho's is this offensive machine that will take you apart. Kakuryu, love him. He just tries to stalemate you until he can figure out a way to put you on the dirt, and I think that that's a very interesting battle technique. The other thing that really caught my eye, Josh, you were talking about the fall and re-rise of Isagahama. If you look at Oruruma, they are similarly facing a loss of some real powerhouse brand name rikishi, with Takakaze, and it appears Yoshikaze now as well. But here we go. Tomokaze is suddenly now in the ranks. He's in the Joy-Jin. He's going to face the top men of sumo this time around. The kid's got a lot of strength, a lot of heart, a lot of talent. I can't wait to see what happens. I'll remind fans that he picked up his first kinboshi fighting Yokozuna Kakuryu in Nagoya, and kind of surprised the Yokozuna, who I don't think really took him credibly enough. But having mentioned it, let's pivot straight into Josh's report. Josh, you were at the Soken yesterday in Tokyo, the Yokozuna Deliberation Council's broad sort of everyone come out and practice. A lot of footage has come out from that. Absolutely fascinating stuff. But let's hear your reaction. You were actually in the Kokugi-Con, right?
Yeah, I was there. I was actually sitting right in front of all the TV cameras, so I had a pretty good view straight onto the dojo. So I went the day before we recorded this is when the Soken happened. I was there. For people who haven't seen it yet, I published a post on Tachiai about my experience, so go check that out if you haven't yet.
It's freaking brilliant.
Thank you. Thanks very much. It's a very different experience to the Basho. Everybody there to begin with is a big sumo fan. You're not going to the Soken to just be like, oh, what's sumo about? You're going there because you know who these guys are. You want to know what's up. You want to know. You're looking for details to try and figure out what's going to happen in this next tournament. So there's a lot of local folks, particularly older folks. We know that older folks love sumo. It was on a Saturday, so there were some families there, plenty of media in attendance. It's worth pointing out that usually the Soken at this time of year is off limits to the public. Right. But what happened is they reversed it this year. The May Soken before the Natsu Basho, this time was closed. It was only for the Yokozuna Deliberation Committee, of course, sumo luminaries, people like Chiona Fuji, and the media, of course, are some of our friends in that part of the world. But unfortunately, folks like us weren't able to get in. So, they reversed it this time before Aki, we were able to go. When we get into the Genki Report in a little bit, we can talk about some specific guys. But I think what's really important when you talk about the Soken is that sort of like the Junyo, and we see that, when Haruth does her reports on Tachiai, we learn a little bit of who's beating who, how did it happen, what was the performance like. What's really important in these types of events is not so much the wins and losses, but how are they performing? How's their health? How's their form? How's their fitness? So these are the kinds of things that I was looking at when I was there yesterday, and in all the furore that can come out about how many times did Hakuho face Abi and how many times did he beat him, there's some other parts of the media there's a little bit more intel on, why did that happen? Why does Hakuho pick Abi? Why, is he a good opponent for him? And how does that impact his fitness? So those are the types of things that you're looking at in an event like that.
So you got to see the Butsukari between Yokozuna Hakuho and Takakeisho, which looked like it was kind of epic. Tell me a little bit about that, because the crowd seemed to be into it.
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, at the time, when you're there, you don't really see all of the nuances in terms of how does this come to pass, right? All you see, especially if you're a little bit further back, as I was, sort of maybe 3/4 of the way back in the lower deck box seats part of the Kokugi-Con, is all of a sudden Hakuho's coming up, and who's he picked? Oh, it's Takakeisho. What later transpired is apparently Takakeisho asked the Yokozuna for that privilege, for the Yokozuna to lend him his chest. Hakuho, when it comes to Butsukari and Kawaigari, he is a brutal taskmaster.
Oh, yeah.
I think it's fair to say.
Almost up to Harumafuji levels, but we'll leave that for another time.
Yeah, for sure. And it reminded me of when I was watching this. It was two things. We'll talk about Takakeisho in a second. But before we were talking here, we were all talking amongst three of us, and Andy referenced the chat that we had on the site where I was talking to Kinta Mayama a couple months ago that we just recently published. And one of the things that we talked about in that conversation was, what is Hakuho going to be like as a stable master, right? Some of the guys he's recruited, we already see them in the top division with Enho up there and Ishira. And so, when you see these moments, you get a little bit of intel, and it's not so much from how does he treat Takakeisho as much as it is in the moments where you think that the individual that he's taking for this session has no more left to give, he makes them give more.
Yep.
And I think that's the thing that's incredible, because you see a guy, on the floor in absolute agony and just exhausted from trying to push, possibly the greatest rikishi of all time, who, foreign fitness issues aside, is still an enormous man, and larger than Takakeisho, across the dojo over and over and over and over again. And Hakuho doesn't let up. And for Takakeisho's part, it was clear yesterday, a lot of folks have focused on the nature of some of his matches. He obviously wanted to take on opponents who he was fighting when he had injured himself and bring that full circle the next time he came back on the dojo. But, it was clear to me that despite the fact, again, we go back to this concept of the wins and losses aren't that important. He had a huge amount of what we like to refer to as ring rust. His body was just not really in fighting condition, and he just only started to get himself back into condition, basho condition, we should say, not too long ago. So for him to be able to get that workout in with Hakuho, I think will have done him the world of good.
Oh, yeah.
But it did certainly illustrate that he's probably not quite ready for Showtime yet. 7 days, we'll see what happens.
Yeah, he's got to pick up those 10 wins to regain Ozeki. I think this will be one of the more dramatic storylines of the entire year, to see if he can do this, because like some other rikishi we love to follow, he will drive himself to the breaking point to get there. So Takakeisho has this fighting spirit that just won't stop. So it's going to be really fascinating. Andy, your thoughts on the whole thing?
Well, no, and another very interesting point to have come out. I think it came out of that conversation that Josh had with Moti about, I guess, secondhand, when Moti was talking to Konishiki, and how Hakuho, he didn't think Hakuho would even be an Ozeki level wrestler back in the day.
Yep.
And so, I mean, it's hard to kind of pair that reality, I guess, over time, wondering how good Hakuho really is right now, and how just dominant he has been with, I guess, our past, with wrestlers in the past, and I guess during what people would consider really the prime time of Takanohana, Wakanohana, Akebono, like that period, and even before Chiona Fuji. But
don't get me started. On a plane flight back from a customer visit, I spent 20 minutes, glorious 20 minutes, watching highlight reels of Chiona Fuji, and it's just like, you look at that stuff and you just go, wow, just wow.
Well, and that's why I'm really, really excited to see more of the Enho and Teretsuyoshi style wrestlers, and some more grapplers coming up. But it's also very curious to see kind of this sudden mass of the Takakeisho style, like Oshi wrestlers. I mean, and Abi took on Hakuho, but Abi is also, and this is where we got to thank Haruth for her Jungyo reporting.
Oh yeah,
Abi is.
By the way, stop. I'm sorry. Thank you, Haruth.
yeah. Thank you, Haruth. Because I mean, we see in that reporting that Abi is trying to shift. Maybe get a couple more tools in that tool belt, because he needs it. He needs to be able to grapple, and maybe Takakeisho might need to, in order to take it to that next level. So until then, it will be interesting to see how long a guy like Goedo can stay along up there at the top as Ozeki. I mean, 2 years ago, he was one of our Kadoban twins.
Oh, yeah.
All the time with Kodo Shogiku. They were Kadoban. It seemed like every other... They were just trading Kadoban status. And he's surprisingly been kind of the most stable Ozeki, where we had hoped Takayasu would be able to kind of take that mantle. But he had that big setback last tournament.
Oh yeah, so you're right on the cusp of it. Let's just dive into it. It's time for, that's right, the Genki Report. We're going to talk about who's banged up and who's doing well. And Josh, you gave us the perfect introduction for fans who may have missed it, may have been serving as part of the Science Foundation in Antarctica. No, I think you can actually stream the videos down there. Takayasu, excuse me, suffered a pretty bad injury to his right arm during his match with Tamawashi, who Tamawashi loves Kotanagi, and so with him, unfortunately, sometimes it turns into a bit of an injury incident, and so Takayasu's right elbow is, I guess, still pretty beat up. Josh, did you see? Was he at the Soken?
Yeah, he was. He was not at all at Genki, so let's get that out of the way right now. He did not participate apart from offering his chest for Butsukari. So he did that with a couple of the youngsters. I think he took Koto Nawaka and someone else towards the end. But, he had a massive bandage on his elbow. Did not take anybody for bouts on the dohyo. He stayed away from the dohyo for most of the day, apart from, some very light stretching exercises around the outside. All the high rankers were there, which was nice because sometimes you have these events and someone's not there. Obviously, that overshadowed a lot of our discussion for a long time. So it's nice to be able to turn up and everybody's there. But certainly, he was the biggest name in the worst shape. With a week to go, I think that it would be really, really difficult. When I look at Takayasu right now, I see three outcomes. The first one is he's Kyujo from the beginning. The second one is he starts but then pulls out midway through because of his injury before or after he can get to 8 wins. Or 3, he finishes the tournament all 15 days. I would say that is the least likely outcome of the 3, certainly looking at where he is now, because not only does he have to start having bouts, but as we talked about with Takakeisho, he also has to get himself into good enough shape. No. No, and the question for me, and this is the question for Takayasu, is does he still think he can be a Yokozuna? Because if he still thinks he can be a Yokozuna, that he can win 2 tournaments in a row or the equivalent, then I would say it's better to learn from the mistake of Kisa no Sato, go Kyujo, because there's not much point in trying to get 8 and stay out of Kadoban if he can recover, because if he's good enough to become a Yokozuna, he's good enough to come back and get 8 wins. So if the goal for him is just to be in Ozeki as long as possible and enjoy that lifestyle, then fine, come back, try and get the 8 wins and see what happens. But I would think that he has enough ambition to take this tournament off.
Yeah, so I also think that, unfortunately, based on the calendar, he's running out of tournaments where he can put 2 back-to-back, and he's yet to actually put 1 together.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I'm a big Takayasu fan and was when he was the perpetual Sekiwake, but I honestly worry that the injury to his right elbow might limit his performance from here on out. Is that if we're 2 months down the road and it's still giving him a lot of trouble, then there's an issue here. Any thoughts on Takayasu?
Just to really reinforce what you guys have both said, I think he could either go the route of Ikioi and try to...
Oh, please don't let him go the route of Ikioi.
And that was another part of that interesting conversation that you had with Moti, the backstory there with about Ikioi and how he's never missed anything. The thing is, missed any days, but Takayasu, like he doesn't have that, and he does have the ambition to make it to Yokozuna. So that's where I kind of hope that he does look at the wisdom of Takakeisho and, okay, I can go Kataban this tournament by doing a Kyujo. Go Kyujo this tournament. Go Kyujo next tournament. Drop down to Sekiwake. Come back hopefully strong. And with all of this churn going on up in the Ozeki Yokozuna ranks,
yeah,
he might be able to pick up 10 wins, like what would that be? November or Hatsu? Like we're looking at a good recovery time. And he doesn't have I guess um that I need to participate in every tournament, and I need to participate that we saw uh, um, with Kisuna Sato, and he doesn't have to participate in every bout like we saw with Ikioi. So hopefully he can take that rest and come back, and with the kind of leadership vacuum that we will probably have around that time, he may be able to come back up into Ozeki status, hang around for a year, and get 2 wins. I think that the next 6 months is when we're looking at. You mentioned Kakuryu. He's going to be probably the top dog for a while, which is just really surprising. And so that's why I think that for the next 6-9 months, that's where you're going to see Maegashira picking people off, lower Sanyaku. So this is where Takayasu might be able to kind of convince himself to step out for a couple of tournaments and come back healthy.
Wow.
But see.
So speaking of people with injuries, he does a really good job of hiding it and not publicizing it. So let's go down to the next piece, next of the Ozeki ranks, because they're all just in piecemeal shape. So Goedo has had a number of injuries that required surgery to his lower body, but he still manages to put himself together and get on the dojo and fight until he gets hurt, in which case his sumo goes to hell. Josh, did you see any Goedo cause for hope, shall we say, at the Soken?
I wasn't impressed with him at all at the Soken. I thought his choices of dance partners were frankly weird. Shodai, whatever your thoughts are on Shodai, he's just not a great match for someone like Goedo, unless Goedo is just trying to make it appear in a public training session that he's more in shape than he really is. And the reason for that is because when you're a guy like Goedo, whose whole game is relentless offense and speed from the Tachiai, taking an opponent in a setting like that that's viewed by the media and sumo luminaries and the YDC and all these people who has no Tachiai is going to kind of skew the way that your sumo really looks. So I thought that was strange. I thought maybe Goedo should consider after sumo a career in politics, because he's able to present maybe a different version of where he's at. Right. After that he took Takayumi, who doesn't practice well to begin with anyway, and then he took Daisho. And as I said on the site, I was like, I get it. These are 3 guys who have 3 very different styles. Shodai, as we know, he's a belt guy. And Takayumi is a pretty solid all-rounder. Daisho, obviously, a sort of squat, pusher, thruster. It's good practice, but I would have liked to have seen him be a little bit more ambitious, because taking somebody on like a Hokuto Fuji or like Yuden, that would have showed us a little bit more.
Or even Asanoyama.
So is he the most Genki of all the Ozeki? Yes. He's surprised us before.
Yes, but in September, no less, with your magic cake.
In September, yeah, of course. That's why I got this cake. But listen, he's not. He doesn't appear to be as fit as either of the Yokozuna. I wouldn't be surprised to see him get to 10 wins because he's Goedo. But equally, if he ended up on 8, that wouldn't be a shock. If he ended up on 7, that would be a shock.
Yep. So he does come in Kadoban. Andy, thoughts on Goedo?
Well, you mentioned it right there. He's Kadoban. He's coming off his injury. He needs to do well. And I couldn't find him in the Jungyo reports.
No, he sat it out.
And so that's why I was like, I think that he hopefully has the rest and is not trying to get himself banged up and injured before going into this tournament. So, hopefully he's taking a little bit of Mitakeumi's strategy to ease into the tournament and not necessarily break himself beforehand. But the thing is, it will just we'll see it when he gets up onto the dohyo. If he's moving forward, he will have a chance to pick up 10, maybe even 12 wins. Last year, this time, I think he had the Jun Yusho, and Hakuho had a Zensho Yusho.
Yep.
So, which I don't see happening this year at all. I think that there are going to be a lot of Yokozeki scalps being had by the lower ranking, by the Joijin this tournament. So I don't think he's going to. Well, and that's the thing. I don't think he's going to need to put together 13 or 14 wins. I think if he gets 12, that will be a very, very solid tournament, and it could be very doable if he is decently healthy enough. But it's the big question.
So moving back down on the sadness scale, let's go for another Ozeki. Tochi no Shin, the glass cannon, the man with the strength of a bear who has the strength of two bears. But it seems that right knee, which he injured many years ago, had surgery, took a lot of time off, and perpetually wears a mechanical knee brace around. Got injured during Nagoya and is still not really workable. Josh, did you see any sort of indication on Tochi no Shin at the Soken?
This is getting so depressing. I'm gonna have to start eating this cake before you.
Yeah, well, you have emergency cake for a reason.
I should bring this every podcast. Tochi no Shin is not Genki. Look, I think that he has worked hard to rehab himself. As you mentioned, he was in real injury trouble back in Nagoya. And again, he's someone like Takayasu who didn't meaningfully participate in the Soken, certainly not in bouts. He did have multiple Butsukari sessions, mostly with lower ranking folks. Kaisho, who's a new member of the Juryo family, got the treatment early on, as well as a couple other folks later in the day. It almost seemed as if him giving those sessions was for the benefit of strengthening his own knees and legs. And it felt, as you watch some of these young guys push him across the dohyo, I was almost half expecting one of his knees to give out at any given time because he just doesn't look sound on his legs. The good thing for him, I think, is it's simple. He needs 8 wins. And that's it. It doesn't matter. Nothing else matters for him right now. He's obviously going to enter the tournament. Is Andy related? There will be casualties in this tournament. And if that's the case elsewhere, maybe his fixture list can be a little bit easier because of other people's problems. So, if none of the other Ozeki are looking great and Takakeisho is not looking great, maybe he can do it. 8 wins to me feels like his absolute ceiling, but maybe I'm wrong.
Oh, come on. So I'm sorry, I got to jump in here. The 8 wins, yes, that's the goal. But the real risk here is that, he's one more tweak on that knee from just, that's it, in-tie. And that's the real risk here. And I agree with Andy. There is going to be blood this time out. I would be surprised if we don't see the wheelchair at least once. Andy, thoughts on poor battered Tochi no Shin?
Unfortunately, I think with Tochi no Shin, the worry is not so much 8 wins, it's 8 days. Can he make it to the second week?
Oh, man.
And you mentioned...
And Josh is eating the cake.
It's delicious.
You mentioned when you had that metaphor about the bear with the strength of 2 bears. Right now, the 2 bears are Swarovski bears. And so we're... or at least Swarovski knees. And we know that Tochi no Shin, in some interviews that he had done with Ijara Sport from Georgia, he's looking to go back home when he's done, and he's going to basically try to be around at least as long as his knees can hold out.
Yeah.
Which this may be the end of when his knees can, how long his knees can hold out. I'm actually kind of hopeful that he's not really looking for an exit at this point. That maybe a Kuroshogiku style. Let's go down the Banzuke a little bit more. Let's kind of rehab, because Kuroshogiku's knees were my concern when he was an Ozeki, and they're not 100% now. Like if he tries to do the burn and churn against Meisei or Kodayuki, he's not going to win a lot of them. But he doesn't have to he's not under that Ozeki pressure anymore. He doesn't have to battle against the Sanyaku day in, day out.
Yep.
And so Kodoshokiku, I've actually seen him pick up new tricks. He threw a couple of people in the last tournament, I think. And
looked
that
good doing it.
Really surprised me.
Yeah.
Can I jump in right there real quick? Because Andy made a really good point, and it reminded me of a conversation that we had for Tachiai it must have been about a year and a half ago when we did the interview with John Gunning. And one of the questions before we did that came up time and again from people on the comment section of the website was, so-and-so's got an injury. Why don't they just take a year off? Why don't they do this or that? And I put that to John, and it was actually in reference to Chiona Fuji at that time, because that was sort of, when he was starting to drop down the Banzuke really hard, and his right after he dropped out of Ozeki. And I think there's a parallel here with the situation with Tochi Noshin. Now, we don't know how the situation with Tochi Noshin is going to end. And he's also someone who's had a much longer career. But when Andy, talks about the fact that he's staying in sumo long enough until he gets to the point where he can go back to Georgia and be with his family, that translated is he wants to make as much money out of the sumo career as he possibly can until it's over. And one thing that John said is, it's really hard to tell somebody who's worked to get to the point where they're an Ozeki, and I'm paraphrasing here, that, they need to take the demotion and they need to leave the private apartment and they need to go back into the Heya and they need to stop taking a salary and all of these things. For him, the goal may simply be to take that salary for as long as possible, come what may. And so, to your point, that just means doing whatever rehab he can, whether that means he's an Ozeki or a Sekiwake or a Maegashira or whatever, so that he can stay at that level and do the best for his career and his family,
And that brings up a really, really interesting point with going back to Ikioi and Chio Otori. I've been wondering whether Ikioi is going to go the route of a Chio Otori, because Chio Otori has a Kabu, if I'm not mistaken.
Yes.
But he's been down there in the Makushita for the last 2 years. Last tournament, he had fought his way back up to Makushita 4, I think, and he dropped back with 3 wins last tournament. And I'm wondering if Ikioi is in that mold, where, all right, is he going to ride off into the sunset like Aminishiki if it looks like he's going to go down into Makushita, or is he going to ride this pony as long as he can like Chio Otori and just enjoy the sport? Because I wonder, and this is where I don't have enough of the knowledge about the salary and the lifestyle, because his personal life, he's engaged to a pro golfer. Does he really need to be in the salary ranks? He's got 5 kimboshi, and so it's does he? I mean, is Teruno Fuji right now somebody's skebito? What hit on his lifestyle has he really had to suffer when he goes back down? If it's not much for a guy with 5 kimboshi to be able to hang around in Makushita, he may enjoy being able to go part-time instead of full-time do 7 bouts of tournament, hang around for a while in the sport, and potentially come back up into Juryo. And I mean, well, Tochi no Shin has done it before.
Yep.
And so I don't know how long they're going to stay around, but it's sure entertaining to find out. So
nice. So we're gonna do one last Genki, and it looks like we just made a tour of the top 2 ranks. So let's talk about Takakeisho. So we've touched on him 3 or 4 times. Was there, besides that well videoed and really sort of great to watch Butsuskari session with the boss, any other impressions from the Sokan about Takakeisho?
Well, a lot of the PR that came out was really positive about his condition. As I said, I wasn't super impressed. I saw Chiona Fuji had some similar comments. He just looked a long way short of match fitness. But, you know, as opposed to some of these other guys who were like, they're injured, they need to take time off. In his case, the only way he's going to break that ring rust off is just by getting back in there. And so if he is healed, he just needs as much practice as possible in the next week to get into shape. Is it too late for him to have a good enough performance in this boss show to put up 10? Maybe. Can he get 10? Yes, he can. But I think it's going to depend hugely on the first week, because the second week is going to be super up in the air as far as who his competitors are, who's pulled out by that time, who's still around, what shape they're in. So for me, he's got to get 6 or 7 wins on the board by day 8. There's a case to be made that he's in a better shape than some of the Ozeki, but again, that's not saying much. So, he looked better, but not great.
So, Andy, thoughts on Takakeisho?
I don't. He's definitely not Genki. He may get his 10, but it will be the last weekend when we'll find out. He won't be picking him up very quickly. That's for sure.
So I actually have a different perspective on this. I think that, well, Takayasu is not going to start. I think that it's possible that Tochi no Shin is out by day 5. And it's quite possible that that really leaves us with just Goedo as an Ozeki and Kakuryu and Hakuho as Yokozuna for him to fight, right? So if we write those off, that gives him 12 possible wins, and I think that it's Andy's right. It's going to come down to the final weekend if it does at all. But the rest of the injuries in Ozeki land are going to help him more than we might expect.
Well, that's the thing. If the injuries stay around long enough for him to actually fight them, then it will benefit Takakeisho. Yep. But if he has to then go up against a Ryuden or a Chiyotairyu, like a healthier, just out of the joy because 2 Ozeki drop out, it may end up making that final weekend a little bit harder. So Takakeisho's his situation is pretty difficult, and so I'm definitely hoping that he'll pick up the 10, but I'm not certain.
Yeah, it's going to be a really thrilling ride for this one. Okay, so it's Josh, get your cake ready. It's time for us to go into our always regrettable predictions. And we don't necessarily have to predict the Yusho winner, but let's have some predictions around the Akibasho. Josh, you're going first. What do you think?
Sure. Rapid fire. I think that this is a Yokozuna win this time. Yep. Tempting fate. I just can't see past them. You know, Kakuryu's not a bad bet to repeat, though that is not really in his history. But when you look at what Hakuho has done to come back from injury again, I think it's really impressive. And the thing to remember with Hakuho is that when he's Kyujo for an entire tournament, usually he takes 1 full basho to get back up to speed. Sometimes 2, but usually 1. And then in the next one, he puts 14 or 15 on the board. This is the next one. And so, look, I don't think it's going to be a Zen show from either of them. But I could see it being a tournament where 13 is enough. With all the chaos down Sanyaku, I think there will be a challenger from further down the Banzuke. Just to kind of rapid fire through some of the guys I think are interesting. We kind of kicked them around before the podcast. I think Hokuto Fuji is a guy who has a point to prove.
Yeah.
Certainly, I think he's going to cause trouble for people who are above him. I think he had that match at the end against Endo last time that was kind of for who's going to get the Komusubi slot, and I think he's got a lot to prove. He's going to be looking up at Abi and Endo thinking, I can be there. I should be there. Tomokaze, I think his run will continue, or at least, potentially. Look, it's not going to last forever, but I think he's a guy who can do some surprises. I wouldn't be surprised for him to finish 6-9, but at the same time, I wouldn't be surprised for him to finish 8-7. So, we'll see. I'm a big believer. And Terutsuyoshi, man, we kind of started the podcast and I was talking about him and how what they're doing at Isegahama could benefit him. Look, I don't think this guy's going to be the Yokozuna, okay? So right. I don't think it's going to benefit him on that level. But Maegashira 9, I think that's a good rank for him. And I think, he's another guy who could have a really good tournament. He's in there in and among some really skilled grapplers who are kind of in a similar, they don't have the same style as him, but Koto Shogiku, Okinoumi, it's going to be an interesting challenge for him to pit himself as a grappler in an age of slappers against those guys. So I'm looking forward to that. And again, for him, 8 or 9 would be a great result.
Go for it, Andy.
Tomokaze and Hokuto Fuji, Josh mentioned, I think both are going to pick up at least 10 wins. I think Tomokaze definitely benefits from having all of the broken Ozeki. He'll definitely pick up a few scalps and maybe a Kimboshi. And his bigger challenge is going to be against the Asanoyamas, the Ichinojos, like the other Joijin, rather than the Sanyaku wrestlers, because they're healthy. Hokuto Fuji, he's fought them all before, and so I think he's going to be, especially with his great work in Jungyo, he's going to be fighting for a Yusho, but I think the Yusho is going to go to Endo.
Oh, wow. And boy, Japan would erupt. And there goes the cake.
I think it will be an Endo Yusho, and then
Andy, you never disappoint.
Terutsuyoshi and Enho, I think, are going to have their own challenges where they're at. Myogiryu will eat Terutsuyoshi's lunch, and Nishikigi will eat Enho's lunch. So,
oh wow, Nishikigi.
It'll be interesting.
You should point out, by the way, I mean, you mentioned Enho. If people haven't seen this, because Haruth puts a couple of these videos, Enho has developed this really exciting rivalry with Shohozan.
Yes. And
this kind of took place all throughout the Jungyo. And when Enho came up, it's funny, before this even happened, I kind of looked at it and I was just like, that is the match I want to see. Because we always say, like, Shohozan is this, like, street brawler, and he has these street smarts, and, like, Enho is just, like, wild and crazy, and, he's all over the place, and you have this new guy and the wily old veteran, and it looks like, they'll probably line up for a match in this Basho.
Yeah.
So people should definitely look forward to that, because it's super exciting.
So I'll close. I'll say that I agree that it's probably going to be Yokozuna Yusho. I also agree that I think it's probably Hakuho's, but some of the action that I think is worth watching. I do think Takakeisho will get his 10, and it will probably be a bigger story than the Yusho because, what's really surprising about a Yokozuna winning a Yusho? But I think one of the other big story arcs that could show up is that Ichinojo may be on for this Basho, which would be really fun to see at Maegashira 2. And I also think that Yu Takayama down at the bottom of the Banzuke is poised to really regain some of his traction. He was at one point Maegashira 1 and was looking very solid. Injuries took him down the Banzuke, and I think it's time for him to rally and come back. So with that, we're going to say goodbye. Josh, enjoy your cake. Andy, enjoy your morning. And all of you, thank you very much for joining us on the podcast. Thank you. And when it's Sumo, think Tachiai.